it has consequences. We need to talk about the biblical response to political evil. And this happens in light of that Time article which come out talking about the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. And it basically is a confession of evil, and we need to have a response to this. And you might ask the question, well, why is it that the church needs to have a response to this? I've been told all throughout my life the church should be separated from politics. And there's a reason why we've been taught that. I was taught that, a lot of us have. But we cannot turn a blind eye to the blatant evil in the world. We recognize that politics, it is something which is both corrupt and corrupting, and that's one of the reasons why the church has stayed out of it. But we need to be mature and recognize the time in which we live and realize there are two distinct reasons why we talk about politics, especially from the angle of the church. One form of discussing politics is in the form of an endorsement. And this can often and very quickly devolve into idolatrous hackery, where you're just endorsing somebody and you attach yourself to their person or policy, whatever, and you kind of lose your soul. And for that reason, we often stay out of politics. But there is a second reason why the church discusses politics, and that is for the form of course correction. Whenever something goes awry, and we find this all throughout Old and New Testament, where there's the prophet crying out in the wilderness to call the forces of the world back to their correct order. Jesus himself embodies this. We see the church there in the book of Acts doing this. We even see the book of Revelation, a smaller scale version of this with sort of interchurch politics, where Jesus comes and he calls out the workings going on in these 7 churches. Some of them worse than others, some of them actually doing pretty well. But it is a very clear thing that one of the roles of the church is to call out evil that takes place in the forms of our political systems. And so recently, Time put out this article, which was titled, "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election." And this entire article is predicated on this magical notion that somewhere out in the ether is this magical rule that says the authors of this, the writers of this, those who opposed Donald Trump, they are infallibly good, and any action they take can neither be bad or itself a coup. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you need to like Donald Trump. That's between you and him, and you make your own decision. I'm not here to think for you. I'm here to open our minds to think critically. But even if one opposes Trump, you cannot allow that to corrupt your soul and throw everything into the garbage. And what this article has basically admitted, that in our dislike of someone else, we're fine destroying everything. And this should remind us that it's very hard to actually improve the world. A lot of people want to just make the world better by deconstructing. You can't. You really can't. The gospel doesn't come as a deconstruction. It comes as a completely, entirely different worldview that comes and has upward aspirations. It is building up the kingdom, there as we find in Ephesians 4. So let me read you some excerpts from this article, and then I will kind of make our biblical response. And again, just reasserting the fact that we're not here just to endorse someone or something or attach ourselves to a political party, because none of them deserve it. None of them deserve it at all. They're not our saviors. They're not Christ. They're not going to bring you goodness, truth, and beauty. God is the one who brings that to you. Now, even though we're not endorsing things, we are going to call out the evil because it has real world ramifications. Sin has real consequences. So this article is pretty disgusting, but I encourage you to read it. Time has it out there. Again, its title is "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election." Now, the first thing I want to discuss for us is something which happens early on. They say, the night of the election, the nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests across the country. And that indeed was true. We saw them get ready days before. We saw buildings being boarded up. That is something which is a verifiable fact. Something which is interesting is the next sentence. They said right-wing militias were girding for battle. Now, if that were the case, where were these militias and where is the evidence of that? Because this statement is not something which is actually congruent with reality in the same way that the last statement is. Largely, that second sentence is a projection of the authors of this, because they did, in fact, plan several protests. The protests and riots which went on last year, which were violent. They destroyed a lot of businesses, homes, lives, murdered a lot of people, even innocent children. Black children killed last year in these things, evil stuff. All this was happening. And 75% of Americans voiced their concern about violence. All right, picking back up in the article, it says, but an eerie thing happened. As President Trump refused to concede, the response was not mass action, but crickets. And their word crickets is really important here because this is what they wanted. They wanted to be able to cut out the tongue of their dissenters. And this reminds me a bit of Acts chapter 4, where evil people, they want silence on issues that they are trying to control. They don't want there to be any dissent. In Acts chapter 4, Peter and John, they go out and do this miraculous healing. The world realizes that, hey, if people see the truth of this healing, they're going to recognize Jesus as the Messiah eventually. So ban them. Say they can't talk about it. We saw very quickly in how things unfolded this idea that we need to suppress stuff. It's always evil. History tells us if someone is trying to silence the conversation about something, they will often tell you it's for your own good. That's not new. They did this all throughout the 20th century. All arguments that have been made throughout history to, censor speech, it's hateful, it's violent. All of those things have been in order to control and manipulate people. In the New Testament, when Jesus tells people, if you have lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery. John writes there in his epistle, those who have, hatred in their heart, they're already guilty of murder. What we do find is that the gospel points out that sin begins in the heart, but it never comes along and says we're here to cut out the tongues of our enemies. It's interesting. It does state the premise that sin starts in the heart, but the conclusion of that premise is your heart needs to be transformed. The conclusion of that is not cut out the tongue. Not cut out the tongue of the enemy. We restrain ourselves so that we can build up things. Okay, so I want to go a little bit more to this article. It says, in a way, Trump was right. And it's, again, this whole premise that there was a coup. Their words, these are the words of Time magazine. It says, there was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes. One that both curtailed the protest, again, meaning they did have these protests lined up, ready to go, and there was people coordinating them. One that both curtailed the protest and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. In other words, this was something which was a massive spiderweb. And both surprises were from the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. And again, I don't want us to think that this is as simple as people who have a D next to their name and an R next to the name and somehow turn this into something where we need to go to war with our family, with our neighbor, the people that we sit next with in the pew. What we need to do in response to this is be critical thinkers, open up our minds, and realize that this is not so much about two people who are neighbors going to war with one another as much as it is people who are in high society forming an alliance to control the entire narrative of everything going on in our world. If we allow this to turn into, I'm going to get mad at my neighbor and hate my neighbor, then the devil has his victory. Everything, it's mutually assured destruction and everything wins. We have to address this stuff with the premise of the gospel that says, I love my neighbor, I love people who disagree with me. But when they have told me it's a zero-sum game, I navigate this by saying I'm not going to go to war with somebody that's just my neighbor. My true battle is against the powers and principalities, these conspiracies, things like that. And we're going to get to how we respond to this personally as well. Back to the article, it says, on Twitter, outraged progressives wondered what was going on. Why wasn't anyone trying to stop Trump's coup? An interesting thing that happens in this article is they talk about Trump's coup throughout it, but they never say what it is. Which means they are telling you what it is. If things went the way they would without their interference, they consider that a coup. Their psychology is that if the people have their voice within the system as it was designed by the Constitution, which is designed that we actually vote on Election Day, by the way. If the system of America, the philosophy of America unfolds as it would, that is what they are calling a coup. The people actually having a voice as they would naturally in an even playing field, that is what they consider a coup. And we've seen this philosophy permeate across a lot of spheres. It's unjust if everyone actually has an equal starting point, which of course, does everyone have an equal starting point? yes and no. We can do the best we can in society to give everybody an equal starting point, but some people are going to be taller than others. I'm horrible at basketball and horrible at baseball. I can be all right at rugby. I can be all right at some stuff with football, but when it comes to like the precise hand-eye coordination, give me a ball and a bat, I'm awful at it. Trying to like make a three-point shot, I'm bad at that. But other stuff which can be, compensated by some more brute force, I can do that sort of sport all right. Soccer, I can do that all right, but when it comes to other stuff, no. And what that means is there are other people who are really good at basketball, really good at baseball, but I don't think it's like a coup against me that some people have that skill and others don't. I have other things that I might be able to do. But there are people who their worldview is, it is a coup if I don't get my way. They are telling us this in this article. They end their article saying democracy won in the end. The will of the people prevailed. But it's crazy in retrospect that this is what it took to put on an election in the United States of America. And their whole article is about the interference that they constructed. So, did democracy win in the end? No, it didn't. It lost. What they call democracy, and they play the word game here, their will won. The will, as they say in that second sentence of their conclusion, the will of the people prevailed. And they did have the wrong preposition there. They should have said the will for the people prevailed. Not of, but for. That's the correct preposition they're going there from their stance. So I'm not here to endorse anyone. In fact, I'm here to say, gird up your loins like a man, Book of Job, and we're here for an interesting ride because all of this stuff is corrupt. But I do want us to be the prophet calling out in the wilderness because this has real world applications, okay? The evil is not constrained to stay in its sphere. The devil and his demons aren't happy to stay in hell. And I actually have no ill, I don't want to condemn anybody. How much someone like Joe Biden actually knows about something like this, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know if it has much to do with him or if he's just somebody that they decided would be the replacement, and so its power is larger than him. I don't know. I hope all these people to have their soul right with God. But I do know this. There is a spirit of the age, and this is where we in the church have to step in. We have to realize there is something bigger than individual persons. And it's also bigger than like collections of people too. There are cosmic things at work here. And what this Time article tells us is that there is evil, wholehearted evil, which has asserted the reins of control. So again, not meaning any ill will to anyone, not meaning any endorsement of anyone. What I am meaning is we have to recognize this evil because it is coming for you. To mutilate your children. We increasingly see that. To come and rob us of the pursuit of happiness. To take away this American experiment, which can simply be explained by having a middle class. This idea that we take the biblical principle that all people are created equal. They all have a voice that is valuable, not because of their perspective or anything like that, but because whenever they speak, whenever they think, they're reflecting God because they are the creature made in His image. That is why people are valuable, because of that breath of life. So the biblical response to this, and then I'll get to how in our persons we apply that. Galatians 5:15 says, "If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another." So, even if you did think that Trump was so bad that something should be done to stop it, which there's a lot of people who think that, be careful. Be careful what you wish for. And to the people who wrote this Time article, be careful what you wish for, because what you are wishing for is something which will destroy yourself. Romans 13:7 says, "Pay all what is due them, taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due." Honor is due the American people as per the Constitution, which opens up its preamble saying, "We the people have formed this more perfect union." Honor was not given to the American people. To the Constitution, it was not given where it was due. Respect was not given where it was due. And now we're at a weird place where you say, well, How do we respond to this? The reason why I opened up with that line about crickets is because what they want is your tongue to be cut out. We need to shine as much light on this as possible. Again, not because we're endorsing people, because quite frankly, if somebody can show me where the biblical worldview is accurately represented in politics, please let me know. I'm not here to endorse any of it. Don't yoke yourself to this stuff. But I am here to say we have to call out the evil. And hopefully down the road, something that is reflecting the biblical worldview will show up. And I know I'm a little bit imperfect in all of this, but y'all forgive me. I want us to apply the love of Christ here, which says, those who I love, I rebuke and chastise. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 26 through 28, it says, "Have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be uncovered, nothing secret that will not become known. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. Whatever you hear whispered, proclaim it from the housetops. Do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell." So our response to this: speak as much truth as possible about everything. Don't become a hack. It's a straight and narrow pathway. Don't become someone who just does get attached to persons. We love one another. But Jesus is the Savior. And when we find ourselves living that biblical worldview, that starts to change the world. That's how we become, people who are doing meaningful things in the history of the church. Let's look at the Great Commission, because the message we should have, Jesus tells us. You can look somewhere like Mark 1:15, "The kingdom of heaven is near, repent." You can look here, the Great Commission, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age." Hollywood is largely just pagan debauchery, but the Conjuring movies are actually pretty good, and strangely enough, most of them still have some form of a biblical worldview. And in the first Conjuring movie, where there's this demon coming after this family, they have no power to stand against it. But Warren, who is there, the man who used to be an exorcist, really popular here in America, he goes in, he's dealing with this, Ed Warren, and he looks at the family and he says, "Have y'all been baptized?" They're like, "No, we're not really a church-going people." He looks back at him and says, "You might want to rethink that." And that's the best I can offer us in this situation. And it's the best anything can offer, because it's actually the only way. I'm not as artistic as, say, the actor who plays Ed Warren, and I can't produce a movie as high quality as The Conjuring, though we in the church, we're going to have to start producing this sort of stuff if we want to actually start, shaping the world. Though we don't do it because we want influence of the world. We do it because we're wanting to be faithful and we're wanting to be excellent in all things and create art that pursues God. We got to keep our eye on the prize, not just think that we're doing it for influence, but we find influence in trying to be excellent in all things. We need to rethink. What are we going to do in response to this? Well, get baptized. That's where it begins. Get right with God. And the world wants us to respond in crickets. What we need to do is, rather than being people who just consume all the time, rather than consuming, television, online material, it's okay to do that, but do it within reason. And even people who like to read books, I like to read the classics of literature. Rather than just consuming, we need to be people who are producing. Find things in your life where you can produce. Don't have an expectation that says, I want to have a big audience and be the next big star online. No, let's not just think that's the standard of what we're doing. You were made in the image of God with a unique ability to reason and think. The way we respond to this is raise up your children so that they can think freely. Because people who are critical thinkers, they don't read that article and think that this is good. They read this article and think that it is wicked. People who are free in their mind, who have been liberated with Christ, they can look at this and say, hey, there's no magic rule that says you're not a sinner. What makes you think you time all so that you're good? I myself, I'm a pastor. I'm a reverend, ordained in the Church of the Nazarene. I'm not sanctified by ordination. The credentials I have at the end of my name don't matter, don't mean nothing. We look there in the book of Revelation when Christ is looking for people to reign with him for 1,000 years. It's the people who will be willing to die for his name. That's what matters. And that is where you get freedom. You start to say, hey, Jesus cared about a man called Matthew. He cares about a man named J. Dylan Proctor, that my mind is transformed, that I'm not just being played and being used as a puppet. That's where we find freedom. Build up our children, build up our neighbors. Let us think freely. Let us call out the evil. And let's be people who are producing things. Find a skill, find something you can do. Go have compassion, go have charity for your neighbor. Be someone who doesn't just consume whatever the world is giving us, but be people who are producing. Teach your children to work with their hands. Teach them how to make things, whether it be, clothing to woodworking. Take your sons and daughters, teach them all the skills you can. And even if y'all are bad at them, I'm bad at a lot of stuff. Y'all are probably all going to be better at stuff than I am. I do like a poor job of everything. I already confessed to everybody I'm really bad at baseball, really bad at basketball. But you know what? We need to go out and do stuff. Give our children the skills where they're producing. They're using their bodies. They're using their mind. They're using their hearts and souls. And our expectation is we are reflecting God in a meaningful way. Somebody messaged me the other day. They had bought a welder. And they said, hey, I've only welded once and that was with you. And I thought this would be easy and it's really hard. And he was kind of upset. He's like, I feel really bad. I'm embarrassed. I can't weld these two things together. And I was like, dude, why are you upset about this? You have been willing to go out and buy a welder and try something that you didn't know how to do. You've only tried to do it a handful of times before with someone there helping you. Now you're out trying to do this by yourself. Man, even if you make the worst weld possible, you still have gained something you didn't have yesterday. You're using your mind like God designed us to. That is a good thing. That is how we respond to this. Not with crickets, but with hearts and minds that are transformed, that look at Christ and Him being the Lord. And that's what we do. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. God love you. And